Hello and welcome into the backfield. I'm your host Connor Schaff, and boy, what a weekend of racing did we just have. I gotta be honest with you, I am almost motivated to do an IndyCar video now. Something that I never really thought I'd do just because that Indy 500 was so good. And then in just perfect fashion, Arvid Lindblad does justice to the fans, delays the start of the F1 race so we can all tune in at the start without having to watch it back at all. Obviously, Arvid Lindblad didn't get off the line just for us, no other reason at all. But today we are going to talk about not the Indy 500, but the 2026 Canadian Grand Prix, which in its own right was an unbelievable race where we had Mercedes drama all weekend that unfortunately ended in heartbreak for George Russell. So we are going to talk about that today, as well as the F2 and F1 Academy running we did this weekend at the end, so that we can clue you in on everything formula racing we had over the weekend. So let's go ahead and get started with takeaway number one. And we are going to go ahead and start with taking a look at this race as a whole, because anyone that doesn't say this was an unbelievable race is lying to themselves. We had a great sprint race, a great main race, and it is just shown now over the last two races that these changes they made to the regulations work. We saw the starting procedures work in all seriousness with the Arvid Lundblad stuff, where they delayed the restart due to an issue we had off the line, so we didn't have another situation like we had with Liam Lawson a at the start of the season. And we are seeing these changes they made that seemed small at first really changed the caliber of racing. And you look at this compared to what we've had for the last 4 years, where all the talk was about dirty air and how you can't follow the car in front of you. We we fixed that issue. These regulations fixed that issue. Now, over time, through these regulations, could it become more of a problem? Absolutely. If you look at the racing in 2022 versus 2025, there was a major drop in the caliber of racing due to the inability to follow. But these cars are much less aerodynamically intact than the ground effect era cars were, which means not anywhere near the amount of dirty air can be produced in comparison to what we've had in the past. So I do have some hope that we are moving in a really good direction here. It looks like in 2027, there's a really good chance that we are going to get a 60-40 split, moving from the 50-50 we have now, though there does seem to be some pushback from some of the engine manufacturers on that. So we will see if that actually does get passed. But even if it doesn't, this racing we're seeing right now is really good. Really, the only race so far this season that hasn't been good was the Japanese Grand Prix. We saw great racing in Australia. We saw an even better race in China. We saw an exceptional race in Miami, and we saw an exceptional race in Canada. These last two races we've had have potentially been the best racing we've had in 3 or 4 years, potentially. Definitely the two best races we've had since at least Brazil 2024. And you have to give F1 their credit for making these changes on short notice and improving the racing to a better standard. Now, we are going to move on to our second takeaway, where we are going to talk a bit about the gap that is growing. Now, I have this diagram here if you're watching and not listening to this, and that is pretty much showing the race pace of all 11 teams. Aston Martin didn't quite fit on the screen, but we have Mercedes ahead of Ferrari, ahead of Red Bull, ahead of McLaren, and then a big mess in the midfield. Now, I think that if you're looking at this diagram, McLaren's race pace is way off what it should be because they were in traffic the entire race, and Piastri was dealing with potential issues from his crash with Albon, and then Norris was dealing with issues from having to retire. And obviously, the disgraceful decision from McLaren as well to start the race on inters when it was very clear it was dry. Just that's an inexcusable decision for them. We're not really going to talk about that too much in this video, though. I think people have talked about that enough. But you could see in qualifying how there is starting to become a huge gap between the top four teams and the midfield teams. And then in the race that really got expressed to us through Isaac Hajar, he had 30 plus seconds worth of penalties and still finished in the same spot he would have if he didn't get any of those penalties at all. Colapinto still, after all of that, finished the race about 15 seconds behind Isaac Hajar. That is crazy, the gap that we're seeing. And only four cars in the end finished on the lead lap, which is it's that's just so insane. I don't think it's going to be quite as bad at other tracks. Pretty much this race, because it was so cold, allowed teams just completely go all out push, which just makes it such an advantage for the top teams. And it gave us great racing, but that is also likely the reason why we had such a gap between the top teams and the midfield teams. Next up, we have a bit of a talk about Lewis Hamilton's resurgence in Ferrari. It was really tough to watch Lewis Hamilton last year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was a rough watch seeing Lewis Hamilton struggle in that Ferrari, look honestly depressed, and looking at that after you see how his 2024 season ended with Mercedes, where he had some really poor qualifying sessions, was getting destroyed by George Russell. It just was a rough year for him. And now he's finished on the podium twice in 5 races. And he just looks so comfortable in these regulations. We kind of expected that these regulations would really favor the experienced drivers. And we're seeing that somewhat. Maybe not because a 19-year-old is leading the championship. But I think that Lewis Hamilton really fits these regulations. These regulations are much more similar to what we had when Lewis Hamilton was dominating in the Mercedes. So I think that we're just going to keep seeing Lewis Hamilton doing really well. I think it's more than possible he finishes P3 in the championship this year, and hopefully he gets a race win because no matter who you're a fan of, I think we can all appreciate Lewis Hamilton getting a race win in the Ferrari. Now, a bit about Charles Leclerc as well. He said himself this was his worst weekend of his career. And it's kind of hard to contest that. He just looked slow. And I think he's really fortunate that he was in the second to third fastest car and the McLarens were completely idiotic in the decision making during the race because otherwise I think he could have finished as low as 7th. And yeah, it was not a good weekend from Leclerc. I think he's going to bounce back though, but second weekend in a row, it's been a bit of a struggle for him. So there does need to be a bit of a recovery from him. And I think we are going to get that. Next up, let's talk about Kimi Antonelli. He's won 4 races on the bounce. He is the first driver to ever win their first 4 races in a row. And can we just appreciate this picture for a second? My gosh, is that just awesome having Lewis Hamilton and one of the Mercedes engineers holding him up on the podium. That is just awesome to see. I think it's really cool to see how Lewis Hamilton has kind of taken in Antonelli as like this protege to him, and he's been super supportive of Kimi, which has been awesome. And but obviously we need to take a look at the championship now. We're only 5 races in, but we're now almost a fourth of the way through the season unless we do get some extra races, which I do think we might. We keep hearing rumors about it. My guess is we'll just get an extra Silverstone race and we'll have a 23 race season. But I think that we now need to start looking at this and the gap that Russell has to Antonelli, because a pretty major thing is Norris. As much as we can compare this to Piastri versus Norris from last year, Norris never had the gap below Piastri that Russell does to Antonelli right now, being that 43-point gap. With all that being said, I think that there is some hope at the end of the tunnel for George Russell, and I, in fact, still think there's a high chance he wins the championship. And I'm going to give you 2 reasons for that. First of all, Russell has just been really unlucky so far this year. You look at him race 2, he was having engine issues. You look at in race 3, he was, and I, China and Japan might be getting mixed up in my head. One of them, he was having engine issues. The other one, he was leading the race, pitted pitted, and then a safety car came out right after and pretty much gifted Antonelli the win, which was super unfortunate for him. He obviously has been constantly saying that Miami is a bad circuit for him. I don't know what I think about that. I like yeah, that would be another conversation to have about whether drivers should really be just going out and saying that they're bad at certain tracks. Um, and then here he has the engine failure during the race and has to retire after having a great battle with Kimi Antonelli and would have had a good chance of winning the race. And I think that I still think that Russell has a great chance to win the championship because there's only so unlucky you can be, right? But the other reason I think will work with this one quite well, and that's if you look at the 2025 championship last year, once we got to the European phase of the season, Kimi Antonelli kind of fell apart. And I think that we need to wait for him to prove himself in this European portion of the calendar. Let me just go through his results in the European leg of the calendar of specific races we're going to. He finished 18th in Monaco, retired in Spain, retired in Austria, retired in Great Britain, finished 16th in Belgium, 10th in Hungary, 16th in Netherlands, and 9th in Italy. He in total, through those races, got 3 points. Not necessarily including there might have been a sprint race or two during that time. I don't know. But through main races, he got 3 points in the entire European leg of the calendar. That is horrible. And he's going to have to be better than that this year. And we've seen so much improvement out of him. But we do need to see him prove himself during that leg of the calendar where he struggled so much last year. So I do think there are some questions still to be asked about Kimi Antonelli's championship hopes, but I think we're going to learn a lot in our next doubleheader between Monaco and Barcelona, because if he does really well at those two races, then it might be all over. And then we will talk a little bit about our midfield for a second here with Franco Colapinto finishing sixth, Liam Lawson finishing seventh. Both of them have been really, really good this season, and I think both of them have virtually secured their seats at this point. I think that if you said what drivers are most at risk of losing their seats coming into the season, I think most people would have said number one is Franco Colapinto, number two would have probably been Ocon, and number three would have been Lawson. Now, Ocon really hasn't had a great season. I don't think he's going to get replaced mid-season like there were some reports of. That got shut down quite heavily during this race weekend. But I think there's a really high chance he gets replaced next year by either Yuki Tsunoda or Rafael Kamara. But I think that Liam Lawson and Franco Colapinto have pretty much secured their seats unless they fall off a cliff. They have been two of the most impressive midfield drivers this year, if not the two most impressive midfield drivers this year. I think that Carlos Sainz might have to be that number one just because of where he's putting the Williams in comparison to where that Williams car probably is. But I think that you have to give a lot of credit to these two drivers. And I think it's going to be tough for people wanting to get into F1 next year because I don't think they're going to be a lot of spots open because of these two guys. But let's go ahead and get into the last thing for today. Let's talk about F2 and F1 Academy. By the way, I just love this picture for some reason. I don't know what they're eating like French fries from somewhere. Why this is the podium photo is just too funny to me. But let's talk a bit about F2 first. In the F2 race weekend, it is pretty clear this year that the way to win in F2 is to not screw up. And Nicholas Solov and Rafael Kamara both screwed up this weekend, and both ended up getting penalties that dropped them out of the points. And Gabriele Mini got third in the sprint race, second in the main race, and is now comfortably leading the championship. Now, it does have to be said that there's no such thing as a comfortable lead in F2. I want to say at this time last year, Pepe Marti was leading the F2 championship, and I and he's now racing in Formula E and doing okay in Formula E. So I still think that it is an open game here. If one driver comes out of nowhere and wins, or just look at Martini Stenshorn this weekend. He wins the F2 race and he moves up from pretty much having no points before this weekend to between the sprint race and the feature race. He's now within the top five of the standings. That can still happen for pretty much the first half of the season because there's so much inconsistency in the field, and the drivers that don't make mistakes are going to be the ones that pick up on it. And looking at the championship, though, Gabriele Mini, like we said before, is leading the championship. Looking down the board, it is Rafa Kamara and Nicolas Solov still in the fight, but obviously they both did not have great weekends. It is also important to mention that in the feature race, or in the sprint race, Noel Leon won the race, becoming the first Mexican driver to win a race in F2. So big credits to him. And as I always do, because it's really cool to follow the story of Colton Herta. He got a P7 in the feature race today. He has now scored points in every feature race and finished in eighth or above in all of them. And really, the big thing is he just needs to work on his qualifying. In race, he has been one of the better drivers moving up the field. And now let's move over to F1 Academy, where there was one driver that pretty much dominated the entire weekend, and that was Alicia Polmovsky. She is a Red Bull backed driver, and I want to say, won both the opening race, which is what they added so that they could hit the same number of races despite not racing in Saudi Arabia, and the feature race, and she won both of those by 10 seconds. Emma Felbenmeyer, the Audi back driver, still sits in second. I want to say she came into the weekend in first. And Megan Bruce sits in third after finishing on the podium in both the opening and feature races. Matilda Pats, the Aston Martin back driver, had a good weekend too. She finished in the top five in all three races and won the sprint race as well. But that is all I have for you guys today. Make sure to let me know your thoughts down below on this race weekend and how you think these regulations are working out. But thank you guys so much for watching and have a good one. Bye.